Oh, I see. She just joined as a co-host. Great. Hi, Anna.
Hi. Hi.
There you are. Excellent. We both made it. Nice to see you. No problem. So welcome everybody to our very first ever virtual lecture in photography, which is being presented by the Museum of Contemporary Photography and the Photo Department at Columbia College, Chicago. I'm Karen Irvine. I'm the Chief Curator and Deputy Director of the Museum of Contemporary Photography. And I'm really happy to have Anna Samoylova here to speak to us this evening. Before we get started, I wanted to make a few general announcements. One is that our next lecture in photography will be on May 13th at 6 p.m. with Sarah Meister, who's a photo curator at MoMA. And also that we have two ongoing virtual programs now. One is on Wednesdays at noon called Photos at Zoom, which is essentially a photo class being taught by some of our graduate students and staff members using images from the collection. And then every Friday at noon, we have a series called Behind the Lens, where we're doing virtual studio visits with artists all over the country. So those are two really great programs. But Anna Samoylova is a long-term friend of the museum's. She moved from Russia to Peoria, Illinois in 2008 and studied photography at Bradley University, earning her MFA in 2011. We got to know her during her time in the Midwest. She stayed until 2015. And in 2014, we were lucky enough to be able to bring in two of her pictures from her Landscape Sublime series into our collection, which we then exhibited in 2017 in our 40th anniversary show. But in 2015, Anna left the Midwest. She moved to Massachusetts for a little bit, and then in 2016 ended up in Miami, where she's pursued art full-time ever since. And that's where she started her FloodZone project, which she will speak to us this evening about in depth. And I ended up running into Anna at Perry Photo in November last year, and she had just released this beautiful publication of the project called FloodZone, which was published by Steidl last year and has a really nice essay by David Campani in it. And this project has gotten a lot of great attention recently. She was lucky enough to have pulled off a solo exhibition of the project earlier this year at the Contemporary Art Museum at USF Tampa, and there are projects scheduled that will hopefully happen sooner than later, coming up at Gallery Caroline O'Brien in Amsterdam and the Print Center in Philadelphia. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Anna. And while Anna is speaking, if you have questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat box. And when she's done, I will read some of them to her so that we can have a proper Q&A. So thank you, Anna, very much for being here, direct from Miami, and go ahead and take it away.
Thanks so much, Karen. Can you hear me okay? Yes?
Yes,
Great.
I can, okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I flipped through. Oh, it's so great to see familiar names. It's just wonderful, especially right now. I want to cry. It's a difficult time. And thank you so much for tuning in and everybody for joining us. Very excited to present. Now, how do I share my screen, right? With the PowerPoint, so it's not my.
Right. So, just the bottom toolbar below the bottom edge of the screen says share screen.
Okay, so start slideshow, right? And then, should not. I will share my screen and I will show my pictures, and I'm gonna try to watch my time. Great. Share screen. Microsoft PowerPoint, right? And open. I'm sorry, just a little. What? Yes. Okay, is it doing it?
Not yet.
Huh. All right, share screen now. Microsoft PowerPoint, share. Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, now slideshow. Full screen now?
Yes, super, perfect.
Oh, very exciting. Okay, Miami Beach, Florida. It's very hot, 33 Celsius. Where do I look? So big, Landscape Sublime. And Yeah, as Karen mentioned, this is my ongoing project. What you see here, a piece called Lightnings, is not a Photoshop manipulated montage. This is a tableau that I assembled in the studio. This is from 2014, and this is an assemblage of images that I sourced from the internet, and then I printed them out and put them together. And I will explain later why I did and continue to do that. Whoops. This one is Beaches 2014, made back in Peoria, Illinois, in my basement studio. So this turned out to be prophetic, I guess, since now I have a bit of a view of the beach. This is a more sculptural one, and you see a mirror and reflections. It's actually a window in the back. I was doing an artist residency, and this is daylight and strobes. So this is a sort of sculptural assemblage of printed out vernacular images that are from public domain and Creative Commons license. This is Crashing Wave, another mood board. Waves tend to be crashing in photographs, dramatic. So this is, it's quite kaleidoscopic, this one of the early images. What you see is a reflection on the bottom, so very multi-layered. You can see some traces of cubism, and I will get to that. This is Rainy Window Views from 2013. Again, a window, the actual window in the background. Those lines that you see, the plastic lines, was actually hurricane protection on that window of the studio that I was using. Interestingly, the concept continued to follow me all throughout these years. So now we have actual hurricane season coming, and it's been 3 hurricanes in the past 3 years for me in Florida. So Rainy Window Views has some actual rain droplets. This is a detail on the bottom, so you can see it's all physical, and the straight lines on prints themselves are from scoring them with X-Acto knife. All right, some explanation. So background info. I was one of the early adopters of Flickr, which was before Instagram. I was still living in Russia. And actually I was studying environmental design in my Russian State University for the humanities. So I was making models of various spaces and living in Moscow, which is, you know, like any huge city, is mainly made out of concrete and skyscrapers. So getting away in nature was sort of a special occasion. But I could traverse these boundaries via online travel. So I would scroll images, and Flickr was this community when it was just sort of starting out back then. I remember joining several groups and noticing certain tropes emerging. This is my version of canyons. I was also, to help pay for college, I was also working as a shop window decorator at this sort of high-end furniture store in Moscow. And then part of my responsibility was, well, among arranging those objects, was to sort of lure people in, the random passerby in the street, with careful lighting and props and color. So the space of the window that you see, sort of this shallow space, I think it comes from there. This is a video of how I set them up. It takes a couple hours, but this is a condensed time lapse. So these are my canyons being put together, and Telepe canyons. I have never been, I still haven't been. I'd very much like to go, but I sort of already can imagine the space because so many images of it exist. This was my sort of vision of America before I moved to the States from Russia. I was taking some lessons in photography, but I was studying mainly architecture and environmental design, as I said. the #1 destination for me was Yosemite. I'm studying Ansel Adams and Carlton Watkins. So this is sort of my assemblage here, and that leads me to Black and White Mountains. When I arrived at the space, to the Yosemite, it was nothing like that. It was more like sort of Stephen Shore. You have to stay on your path. There are plenty of tourists, rather than Ansel Adams, I thought. Then I started questioning this illusionistic ability of photography. And since I was pretty much self-taught in photography back in Russia, I picked up a camera just to document the spaces. I was making models of environments. My thesis project in Moscow was a reconstruction of an abandoned streetcar depot with available materials, with recycled materials from the site. So I was building models by hand. They're paper models that I had to photograph. And that's how I learned photography. I noticed how lighting can transform the scale of the space in the picture. And then the picture always have this sort of finite edge. So I was really drawn to formal aspects of a picture as an object as well. Sort of, I had to print things out and then sculpt them. So the sculpting part comes from there, from my practice as, I guess, a budding architect back then. This is a video of Black and White mountains being assembled. I noticed that a lot of mountains were converted to black and white, even if they were shot digitally initially. And the type of photography I'm talking about is sort of user-shared image archives, like Flickr, or now we have Instagram. And this is not even a black and white image. These are actually in color. You can see some gradations in tone. Glaciers here from 2014. Some reflective materials, props. With glaciers, this was inspired by a funny story. There was a feud between two photographers. One won a contest. Here's that story. Actually, I think it's on Petapixel from 2015. I thought it was really funny. One on the bottom left won a contest with some monetary award. And then the top right, she sued her, claiming that it was her image that was photoshopped. So, and then she won the contest. It turned out there were two tourists on the same boat, on the same cruise in Chile. And that inspired glaciers. But something, you know, it's a really multi-layered work. You can't really take it at face value. It's playful. It's sort of this model of a constructed world, the idea that these ephemeral images that I find online then take this physical shape, and then they're reconstituted into a new environment. The highly sort of constructed artificial look of that environment is really a gestural metaphor for constructedness in photography. You know, a photograph is always a construct in my understanding, but it has this very real power to influence our understanding of the world. And as somebody who moved around quite a bit and moved continents, I'm always sort of questioning this imagined reality and then encountered reality. And then the ability of photography to, I guess, relay an accurate picture of the world, you know, especially with landscape, I thought would be, you know, sublimes can be, I call them sublimes now, can be with a variety of genres, but I thought landscape would be particularly illustrative of that ability, and sort of photography's shortcomings too. How do you transform a three-dimensional, you know, vista into a two-dimensional picture plane, and then and then try to understand the world through that. So I've never been to Chile, but this is sort of how I've been picturing glaciers. And of course, we know that they don't necessarily look as blue and as enhanced in real life. It's only particular light, and glaciers are melting at rapid speed. This is an image from, it's just from Facebook. just to point out some formal aspects of these assemblages that look like collages. My past work in Russia was really influenced by these Amazons of Russian avant-garde, the 6 women listed here. You can see some resemblances here, painterly architectonic. So the moving planes of that space, the angular, the dynamism of those lines, the distorted space. Alexandra Exter is really one of my favorites. She's also known for her theater sets. I studied her for my environmental design, the way she renders and sort of disrupts the space. This is one of the sketches by Alexandra of a theater set. Barbara Caston, a name very familiar to you in Chicago. A diptych here. I discovered Barbara actually upon moving to the States. I was not familiar with her work back in Russia, but it all made sense to me. The influence of avant-garde, of Bauhaus, and then for Chicago School, Moholy-Nagy, and so forth. I was delighted to discover her work and then spent quite a bit of time with it. And this is my desert Mirages. In terms of the name of the project, Sublime, the sublime part refers to, well, it's an aesthetic category, right? There's a picturesque, the beautiful, and the sublime. Talking about Kant and Schopenhauer. I was reading aesthetic theory at the time. And Schopenhauer illustrated his concept of the sublime with examples from nature. So something as grand as desert mirages, a desert landscape can overwhelm an individual. So the scale played a role. And again, shrinking them to this postcard size, I'm sort of wondering whether the sublime can be translated in photography. This is my forests. And again, you can see the parallels. This is Natalia Goncharova, my absolute favorite. This was the time of Cubism and Rayonism, Futurism, and her thing was everythingism, which I absolutely adore. She was unafraid to try it all out, and she sort of excelled in all her pursuits. Aspens from 2013, again, release of Disrupted Space. This is a simple one. And you see the recognizable elements within those smaller fragments. Trees and fog. There's one sitting behind me because I had 4 exhibitions canceled this spring because of the virus. Storms here, and you can see some studio props on the top left. Clamp, and there's some paintings woven in, and it's reflective sort of rainbows. Also questionings of the lives of images, how they travel, how they reached me on the internet. This is double rainbows, and then where do they go from there? Well, this one in particular moved on to become a cover of this catalog with a perfectly suited title of the recent biennial in Germany called The Lives and Loves of Images. So on the right is the cover, and it unfolds on the left side. And then the images were presented really sort of in a tame manner, like I usually present them in a gallery or a museum setting at Wilhelm Hack Museum in Ludwigshafen. And they put me next to Richard Hamilton, which I was delighted about. So I had to include that on the right side. And then in that same museum, I discovered Olga Popova as another favorite, one of those Amazons of Russian avant-garde. And I had my little landscape sublime book with me. So the comparison is right there. You see the same angular forms. So this project has as much to do with painting as it does with photography. It's sort of the method is very painterly, it's additive. I start from blank and then I fill my tabletop space with elements. It's all very intuitive, and there's definitely an element of play with that. It takes a few hours. It's kind of, there's a choreography involved. I have to run back and forth from the camera, and nothing is scripted in advance. This is another piece that's in the Biennale. It's called Four Seasons. This is a large one, 26 feet long panorama, which was initially, interestingly, speaking of lives of images, initially was a commission for public art for Mount Sinai Hospital in Miami Beach. And I figured that these small elements would allow patients who sit in the waiting room to sort of unwind a bit. On the distance, it looks like sort of textural, really abstract piece, but upon closer look, which this is a huge piece, you can see all the sort of calendar imagery within. Here it is in the museum in Germany. A couple of years ago, these were presented as public art in Brazil as these large billboards. And I really enjoyed that scale, so I kept going with these public art commissions. This was not a commission, they just printed out the images. But further on, I've been taking some commissions like this one, which was perfect for this project, called Layovers. I've been traveling quite a bit last year, and some travels involved multiple stops in my flights. So running through the airport, I would see postcard images of the places that I've not visited, but sort of it again builds that imagined world in your mind and in your memory, like running through Madrid, or in this case of Paris too. So these are called layovers through multiple stops, and the imagery is sort of postcard imagery that you will encounter at an airport. Here's a detail. This is New York to Miami, and all of those flights went through Miami in my routes. So it's sort of imagined places based on the images you see while passing through an airport. This one is called 6 Real Matterhorns. There are 7 Matterhorns there, but there's one from Disneyland, which is a fake one, and it has a waterfall. So Matterhorn only looks like that from one particular point of view. And again, this is really a gestural metaphor for photography having that singular point of view and one perspective, and sort of pointing that out, that it's never the real thing, right? This was a commission for that same biennial. It's on the facade of a museum. And this is sort of when you search for Matterhorn on Google image search, the one that comes out is all sort of snowy, but in reality is no such thing. This is a great pairing, I thought, with Caspar David Friedrich on the left in the Aperture magazine, previous issue, Spirituality. And this is my Google image search on the top left for Matterhorn. So you see the snow, and this again, this is sort of how it builds the image of itself in our minds. And on the right, the issues with Matterhorn now. Google image search for climate change photography produces results of predictably melting glaciers and suffering polar bears. I had to put in photography because climate change would just produce a lot of graphics. So wondering about picturing with the world that we can't quite see, world of that's changing. How do you picture the change? Moving to Miami in 2016 was the hottest summer on record. I'm a Nordic person. This was really wild for me, everything. So with being sort of a studio person for years, studio-based artist, even with photography, was always sort of constructed imagery. I realized I don't need to make anything up anymore. Miami is already sort of a live scale collage. So this one is as is. It's just a construction billboard. I noticed that Miami is truly sort of plastered with the ideal images of itself. It's always promising sort of better world. This construction in South Beach. At first, this is one of the earlier images. This is not really one of my key ones, but I think it's important to mention, for a couple of years, this wasn't really a project. I was trying to understand the place and this new environment, and questioning this sort of dichotomy between the presented image, the image of these coastal towns as we imagine them based on, you know, again, the projected picture, right, that we find in advertising, on TV, you know, media, versus the streets I was walking in, and what I was seeing, and the high tides, low tides. This is the high tide in Key Largo. So this is before I knew I had a project going. Another construction, so just noticing images within images. Always this sort of contrast. This place, Normandy Shores, is really experiencing climate gentrification right now. Another construction billboard. To me, it looked like one of those cubist paintings by Goncharova. So I kind of found my city, found me. It's called Fountain, from 2017. This place is no longer there. I can't find this building. It's gone. It's really rapidly changing. Miami is very quickly developing despite all odds, and so are many cities in South Florida, West Coast as well. In 2016, we had our first Hurricane Matthew, which wasn't too bad. I was mainly scared and sort of starting to research what to do. In 2017, we had Hurricane Irma, which was sort of approaching as Category 5, and it hit as Category 3, which is bad enough. This is actually the day after Irma, and this is my son and our flooded garage. I live in one of those tall condo buildings. It's an older building from the 50s. So we didn't evacuate. We actually could not evacuate. There was mandatory evacuation, but there was no gas anywhere in town. I really did not want to be stranded on the highway trying to escape. So we stayed in, figuring out our windows were original in the buildings from the 50s. So we were sort of okay, lost power for a few days. Damage was significant. But I really did not want to sort of add to this already vast ocean of images of disaster. I did not want to do any sort of trauma reportage with these. So I wanted to take a subtler approach. This is a pool in our building after hurricane. These are chopped up mangrove leaves that just flew over. We were one of 4 families that stayed in this huge building. So speaking of sublime, I certainly experienced that. This is Miami River. The majority of images are really sort of metaphorical and allegorical, and not what you would expect from the title, which I like. This is not even flooding. This is just developed land. So the kind of land that's being developed is on the left, and then on the right, you see the waterfront houses, and there are plenty of those. So you can imagine that with rising seas, none of that is really long-term. I encountered these huge manatees, alligators. This manatee on the left is in the quite polluted Miami River, just downtown. These 2 pictures are a few days apart, roughly from the same spot, just sort of looking around. Manatees on the bottom left, clearly lost their protected status. They're no longer considered endangered. So there are problems with that, and they're getting injured by quickly passing boats. Not everybody is obeying the speed limit in these rivers, and these are all manatee zones. This is just my reflection. Again, speaking of layers, the complexity from landscape sublime is still there, but this is just my reflection. You can think of Vivian Meyer and Lee Friedlander. It's sort of continuing the genre of, you know, trying to sort of understand what your place is in this environment, and how you can really put roots down in a place where the only secure roots belong to mangrove trees. Painted roots on an old building. I did not want doom and gloom mood in the project. So this is really about maybe stubbornness, and about this resilience, and about pointing our attention to how much bigger this natural world is than we are. And with climate change, we all know that the Earth will be, well, it won't be fine, it will survive. It's us who are threatened. This is Manatee Rescue Van. Again, pictures within pictures. This is not even a storm or anything. This is just high tide in this old estate from 1910s in Miami called Vizcaya. It's absolutely beautiful, and they're struggling to maintain the premises. This is street crossing in Little Haiti. Climate gentrification is a real issue here in Miami. What used to be, of course, the most lucrative properties were waterfront, like those houses that I showed you earlier. But now developers and, well, the wealthy are moving to higher ground, and Little Haiti is one of those areas. And so the original population of Little Haiti is being kind of priced out of it. This was in 2019, this is just last year. This is a street where my studio is, and this is simply high tide. So it's called king tide, where the tide is higher than the predicted high tide. This is right around the corner from the convention center that used to host our famous Miami Beach Art Basel, which is now a field hospital for COVID. This I thought was also a good sort of layering to show that climate, to show gentrification, period. Roosters, and then in the background you see the new building by Zaha Hadid, downtown Miami. Road, this is aerial photography. This is near Merritt Island. This was one of those, funny story. I will talk about the book. This is an image I took the day before I had to fly and submit my maquette for the book. I thought I needed something, some action shot, because most of the images are really sort of still. And then there's this perfect grouping in Miami Beach, a bride on the left. This is, again, lesson learned. I was walking around and I kept seeing chicken heads. And this is the setting where the Manatee is, roughly. So downtown Miami, yachts, skyscrapers, and then this floating head. There's no body. So this is a ritual. Somebody explained to me finally in the street that this is a Cuban Haitian ritual of Santeria, animal sacrifice. And I thought of FloodZone as also, you know, since there are so many metaphors woven in, and it's so layered, as the sort of mythological flood, as a kind of a society that's really ready for change, for cleanse. Pink sidewalk in the Faina district in Miami Beach. This is after Irma. This pink sidewalk is sort of a beautiful pink line throughout the entire island of Miami Beach. And this is when I started laying those pictures out together. And I reached out to brilliant editor and writer and curator David Campany, whom Karen mentioned, and started sending him the images for pairings. And this is now in the spread in that book. Another pairing here roots on the left. I love the camouflage on the right. Again, this could have been my set from Landscape Sublime, but this is just there. And I keep encountering these gems every day. Yes, so the FloodZone is a product of 3 years, 2016 is 4 years of shooting almost weekly. It's a low success ratio. With Landscape Sublime, I knew I would have a piece by the end of the week, for instance, but here it's unpredictable. Green mold I thought looked kind of like Rothko, and my son thought that it looked like a forest, so that made it into the book. Ruin of Tabby, shell construction in Georgia. So with FloodZone, there are 4 states there, and this shows one of my influences, Walker Evans. I actually just sort of verbatim recreated almost the point of view here, and it ended up in this exhibition called Walker Evans Revisited. So 3 of my ruins, one of them is in the book, another one there. Installation. Evans is a major influence of mine for many reasons. You know, his acknowledgement that images really form our understanding of the world, and he's frequently photographed sort of pictures within his pictures. And this is in Florida as well. And he photographed in Florida quite a bit. He actually did a commission for Carl Bickel, Mangrove Coast. On the bottom left, in the first edition contains 32 of his images, and further editions didn't have any in 1942. But you can find the book on the top. That's available. Park Avenue, another billboard. This sort of trompe-l'oeil, again, my pink sidewalk in Miami Beach, and the hotel that sort of was gutted from the inside. Only the facade was left, and it's sitting in that state for the past 3 years. Concrete erosion. I was told that these might be, so this is a bridge above a highway. I was told that these might be chemicals, and that's why there's that color. This is one of the 2 staged photographs on the left hand. It's a cutout of my hand in water, and I set it up while at an artist residency. So there are 2 still lifes. On the right, my South Beach reflection. The color palette is quite important. Miami Art Deco district, the famous Miami Beach Art Deco district, was initially white, and then it was all recolored to attract tourists, and mainly it's pinks and violet and turquoise, all these pastels. Another homage that you might recognize here, covered car, Robert Frank, of course. So I really don't have any ruin photographs here. I wanted to steer clear from any cliches, but this is the one ruin that I just couldn't pass up. Dome House in Cape Romano. The story is too curious. It's only accessible by boat now. It looked like this sort of a creature from Dali painting, or it looks surreal. Anyways, the story is it was built on land. It was not in water in 81. I thought it's much older than that when I saw it, but it was built in 81 by this old oil magnate. And you see on the bottom the graph of what the rising sea has done to that house. So it was eventually destroyed by hurricanes and shore erosion. I was reading The Drowned World by J.G. Ballard at the time. You see the wonderful iguana in the foreground, sort of thinking of oversized reptiles, and then bam, I saw this gator came really close. It's really an easy photograph, but sort of visually it worked, so it made it to the cover of the book. So the gator's rear end is the cover. Again, thinking sort of mythologically, this is me arriving at Steidl, Ville in Göttingen, with my own maquette of the book. So I printed out all the images and the sequence. David Campany, the editor, was the one who proposed it to Gerhard Steidl. And then Steidl likes everything physical form. And this is me waiting for him to come in and approve the maquette, which he did then. This is a little video of some spreads from the book. It has more pictures. It's over 80 photographs, and about 50 of them have some reference to water, but not really any doom and gloom. They do have sort of a sense of irony sometimes, and yeah, a whole wide variety of approaches. 3 years of work and 4 states: Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Georgia. And next, Lives of Images, my first museum solo that I was really lucky to have this January. So the gator made it to the facade of the museum. I made a model of the space. It was an interesting, really dynamic space, and I just couldn't have dreamt of a better space for my first museum solo. There's angles, again, sort of the Russian constructivism, the cubism of the 1920s in Russia, and this triangle, it's a huge triangle. And I came up with these billboards in the middle for my billboard pictures. So here it is in space. Couldn't believe the wonderful curator, Sarah Howard, said yes to my model, and all the insane colors. To me, of course, the colors reference Miami. You know, it's slightly aggressive. The lines are really dynamic. It could have, you know, it could be a giant sort of shop, which a lot of Miami does feel like an outdoor mall. The colors really are sampled from the environment. And this is the road. These are prints on metal. The manatee is the entrance, and this is how they were framed and paired together. Some were really borrowed from the book. Some more pairings, the domes on metal and eggs framed. And again, speaking of Lives of Images, the one on the far right is Square Lake in Miami. This is right near the Everglades, this bizarre lake. This was made initially on the commission for a magazine for Bloomberg Business Week. This is how it looked like at first. And they provided the helicopter. So I was flying there without a door with a really long lens, and it was my first flight. And I thought that was gonna be the last flight. FloodZone is not ending. This was just its first iteration. So these are my plans for FloodZone 2, Virginia, Maryland, New Jersey, New York. Next iteration will be Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. I need to revisit Louisiana, and then potentially other coasts of Florida. And then there's FireZone brewing. And as you know, working photographer, working artist, it's all sort of funding dependent. Whenever I get a commission, whenever I get a grant, I already went out to Virginia to photograph in Tangier Island, which is remarkable, sinking really quickly. So these are the very early images. This is potential fire zone. Again, there was a commission for Bloomberg in California. So just in 2019, Saddle Ridge fire here in Santa Clarita. I've never seen anything more apocalyptic than California after fires. The books that I was reading at the time, and I would highly recommend if you're looking into researching the subject, is these three: Habitable Earth by David Wallace Wells, Rising by Elizabeth Rush, and Water Will Come by Jeff Goodell. Really easy to read, and they don't sort of kill you with statistics. This is mine. So FloodZone is available on Steidl. It just came out in the States in January. It's available on other shops too, but Steidl does ship free And on the top is my Instagram, what is it, thing. This is the book. I think is my time up? Just trying to watch it. Did I do right?
Perfect. Thank you, Anna. Thanks very much. Awesome. We have a few questions that have come in, and while you have the publication up, Eva Zabrowski is asking if you could speak about David Campany's essay in the book and tell us a little bit about your...
Well, David is a brilliant writer. He edited the book, and then it's just written in his style. And I knew that his style will leave the interpretation of the project wide open. It doesn't serve as the sort of definitive statement about the project. Because to me, it's more complex than, by all means, a documentary, a document of climate change. So as I outlined some of my other influences, and with David's knowledge in photography, yeah, I highly recommend you read that one. It's available online too, if you don't want to buy the book.
Excellent. Another listener is asking about what your theory of the sublime is based on, and whether it might be based on Edmund Burke's, it's jumping around, a philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and the beautiful.
Yes, that's precisely what it's based on. I should have quoted him. I forgot him.
Excellent. So the idea of the sublime kind of being able to trigger these strong emotions is part of it, right? Excellent. Have you been able to shoot during the pandemic? And if so, has it changed your practice? Someone is asking.
Yes, I still go out. It's bad, I guess, but I pretend that I'm exercising. So I'm just wearing my sneakers and my shorts, and I'm wearing the mask. I found an N95 mask from the time where I was like restoring old furniture. So I was really lucked out. Yeah, I woke up my camera. Just a week ago, we had massive king tide. Half Main Beach was flooded. So you see masks, construction that is essential somehow, and it's ongoing, and then cars in water. I was not very successful with my pictures on that day. I think I was overwhelmed. But yes, I'm still photographing. It's just my range is a lot smaller now.
Yeah. If we go back to landscape sublime, we have somebody who's interested in how you determine what props and objects are incorporated into the photographs. And then someone else wanted you to kind of go back over the process and whether they're done digitally and on the tabletop, etc.
Yes, they're all done on the tabletop. Try to pull up one of the videos. So here. Slide. There it is. You see, it's really basic props, foil and pictures and mirrors and colors and paper, and this is a setup. Sometimes I scrap the whole thing and I do it over again. It's quite animated. There's sort of like a dance involved. I put them up, I run back to my camera, it's a digital camera. And so is the entire FloodZone is digital. I'm a digital native person. I got my first 5 megapixel camera back in Russia, and that was the hottest thing, top thing on the market. So it's pre-iPhone, all that. Film just never stuck with me. Yeah, so it's all physical. It's a physical assemblage. One day, I hope to make an immersive environment where you can walk into it. And I already have sketches of that. But again, with small studio, you really need a location where you're going to assemble it all.
Yeah, definitely. Another listener is asking if you could tell us a little bit about your breakfasts project. And what was your inspiration for the project? And are the photos and the images your own, or are they out of magazines or books?
Oh no, they're books. So I didn't, I thought I would run out of time. This is my other project. And this is what I'm doing actually right now during COVID, because I can make them on my balcony. breakfast was really a transition between Landscape Sublime and FloodZone. When I moved here, I really needed some inspiration. You know, like you can't be a good writer without reading a lot, and I don't think you can be a good photographer without looking at a lot of pictures. So I have a collection of photo books, and since I was no longer teaching, this is what I was doing in sort of prior life, I could finally have breakfast. So I was not rushing to my morning class, and I could lay out my little coffee and fruits over photo books that I have, or then, you know, I would get from library. Well, it's none of the books have been damaged, no issues. I'm really careful and pretty skilled at arranging those basic still lifes. But the project is very sort of pictures generation. It's like an homage. At times it's a bit subversive, but there is a book in the making, I hope, and to be honest, I'm looking for a publisher to send me more books so I can have breakfast with their books. And then it's going to be sort of an illustrated anthology of art books.
Nice, you're busy. Okay, questions keep rolling in. Could you talk about what the conversation was like with Aperture in terms of printing your photographs for the spirituality issue?
Oh, well, they just used it. I don't know. There was no, oh, because I'm not using any authored images. I'm not using any copyrighted images.
Okay.
That's really not the conversation that I'm interested in having on the larger scale. So with Breakfast, I am actually crediting all the photographers and even the books in the end, in captions. And then with the Sublimes, all of those images are either public domain or Creative Commons. So Flickr has this Creative Commons license enabled. For my public art commissions, I get images from stock libraries. So yeah, I'm not sort of doing any copyright infringement with those.
Mm-hmm. One of my colleagues would like to ask you if could you speak about your choice to include the black and white images within the color?
Yes, so one of the breakfasts was with Evelyn Hofer, and she combines both black and white and color images in her New York series, which I really liked. So, all of the images are digital, but some, you know, in this day, of course, the original space is color if you're shooting digitally. So the choice to drop that color is the choice to, in essence, to abstract the image a little further. And when color doesn't really contribute anything, I thought it would be distracting. So I removed it. But those images still contributed to the overall sort of non-linear, but still narrative of this story of FloodZone. So there is a certain, like a little bit of a formula in the book. All the color images are, all the color images are vertical and they have a border. And then the black and white images are actually full bleed. There it is here. So it creates this certain rhythm. Yeah, and those are joint decision with the editor.
Nice. Okay, Brooks Plummer would like to know, when you're shooting now, do you try to find scenarios you can use specifically for FloodZone, or are you just looking for aesthetically interesting scenes and realize later that they fit in? Do you have any plans for images that don't fit into FloodZone?
Oh, that's a great question. I think about it all the time. And since I'm trying to keep it, pun intended, fluid, because FloodZone came out of a very fluid process of just accumulating those images, and then it was a really careful edit that made this into a project. So I'm continuing to think along those lines, and if I see something that interests me, I'm not going to just pass it by. So I have this sort of subfolder of street photography, and so on. There are other projects that I'm considering. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Someone would like to know about your sense of styling, your experience and gift in styling that's so central to your previous projects, and how you think that might be evolving in FloodZone.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so with this, with Landscape Sublime, they're sort of sleek, they're kind of like packaged views, almost ready for sale. There's a bit of darkness in that project. So the commodification of landscape, it's one thing to shrink a landscape to like a scale of a plastic water bottle and then what that water bottle does. Yes, the aesthetic is important. And in FloodZone, I think I kept some of it, at least I tried. It works with the color. So it shows through the color, the use of color. There's fairly shallow space in most of FloodZone, apart from the aerial images. My pictures, a lot of them sort of have walls, and there's this sleek, again, aesthetic. They're sort of seductive, and that's intentional. They're meant to kind of lure you in, like those images of billboards that sort of propose this better world. Does that answer it?
I think we'll address, yeah, she says, yes, totally. I think we'll address one more question about being in the plane, the aerial shots and how they're done. And then I'll read one comment after you tell us a little bit about the airplane.
Oh, that was fantastic. So this was a commission from Bloomberg Business Week. Where's that photo? Square Lake. And so is this another commission? This was a helicopter. They sent me a reference, a National Geographic from the 80s. And they said, can you do something like that? And Florida is so flat. You really have to be above if you want to see the geography of it. So that was the logic behind it. The stories, one was on genetically modified cattle. The other story was on saltwater intrusion and Biscayne aquifer. So it's sort of not exactly flood zone, but since we are in the flood zone, I used them in the book. To answer the question, yes, I was on a helicopter and I had to rent a really long telephoto. And then it wouldn't fit in the helicopter, so we had to remove the door. And then we strapped me in, but I realized the strap is basically like your plane strap. It was terrifying, actually. And then later on, when I solicited some feedback on my photo, I took a sort of a selfie, so parting with the world, that you're supposed to tape it. So I got all kinds of helpful tips afterwards. But initially, yes, I'm flying in a helicopter, it's leaning, there's no door. I'm just rolling on sheer adrenaline the whole time, but it was epic and I would like to do it again.
All right, well, it looks like that's most of the questions and we're coming up on, I think we're at an hour, but I'll read one last comment from Lindsay Palmer. She says, she really enjoys how your work transitions from creating your own tabletop landscapes and assembling themes to finding and making images of landscapes. The styles feel so different, but when you see them together in this presentation, it feels like a natural progression.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I need to write this down.
Exactly. We'll have to capture all of the comments and questions somehow and send them to you.
And paste that.
Super. Oh, one last minute one. Are you inspired at all by David Hockney? Some of your work made this listener think of 3D versions of his joiners.
Oh, there's so many things I'm inspired by, but absolutely, yes, Hockney. Yes, the layers. Of course.
Of course. Right.
It's made in vacuum, so sort of breakfast. There's some breakfast there that acknowledge precisely that. It's sort of what you're made of, or your visual memory that comprises what you come up with, even with sort of documentary photography and reportage. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, excellent. Thank you so much. We're all going to give you a mental round of applause for your wonderful talk this evening. It's really nice to see you. And thanks everyone for being with us, and please tune in for our upcoming programs. Thanks, Anna. Best wishes, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you again virtually soon, hopefully.